Let me tell you something about life. Life has a way of circling back, not to test you, but to reveal you. The same door someone walked out of with pride, they often return to with humility. And when he comes back, it won't be with confidence. It will be with silence, regret, and a question he's afraid to ask. Did I lose the best thing I'll ever have? There's a moment in life when silence becomes louder than words, when absence teaches lessons that presence never could. You see, when someone leaves you, they don't leave because you weren't enough. They leave because they didn't know how to value enough. People don't usually walk away because something lacks worth. They walk away because value often feels invisible when it is constant. When something is always there, steady, loyal, predictable, it stops feeling precious and starts feeling permanent. And permanence creates illusion. It convinces people that what they have today will still be there tomorrow, unchanged, waiting. That illusion is dangerous. It makes people careless. It makes them underestimate what consistency costs, what loyalty requires, and what love actually demands. So when he left, it wasn't because you were replaceable. It was because he believed your presence was guaranteed, and guarantees make people lazy. Most people don't recognize value while they're standing inside it. They only recognize excitement, noise, and novelty. Value is quiet. It doesn't beg for attention. It shows up on time. It stays when things are uncomfortable. It chooses commitment over convenience. And that kind of value doesn't always feel thrilling. It feels stable, safe, grounded. But stability doesn't impress someone who is still chasing validation. So they mistake peace for boredom and depth for limitation. They walk away thinking they're searching for more, not realizing they are walking away from something rare. Distance has a way of sharpening vision. When you're close to something every day, you stop seeing its shape. But once it's gone, the outline becomes clear. The late night support, the patience during failures, the way you believed in him when he doubted himself. Those things didn't disappear when he left. They simply stopped being available. And that absence becomes loud. It echoes in moments when no one else shows up the same way, when replacements fail to carry the same weight, when surface-level connections collapse under pressure. That's when value starts to reveal itself, not in memory, but in comparison. Leaving is often an act of emotional immaturity. It's easier to abandon something meaningful than to rise to the responsibility of protecting it. Value requires accountability. It asks people to grow, to communicate, to confront their flaws. Not everyone is ready for that. So instead of admitting they're unprepared, they convince themselves that walking away is strength. But walking away doesn't erase value. It delays understanding. And the delay is costly because once something valuable is gone, the lesson becomes permanent. You don't learn it through explanation. You learn it through loss. Understanding value almost always comes too late. It comes when pride has nothing left to defend. It comes when distractions stop working and silence becomes unavoidable. It comes when the mind replays moments that once felt ordinary but now feel irreplaceable. That's when the realization hits. Not all losses are equal. Some losses don't just hurt, they reshape you. And the cruel truth is this: people don't miss what they had until they understand what it gave them. And understanding usually arrives only after the door has already closed. Ego is loud in the beginning. It speaks with certainty, confidence, and entitlement. It convinces people they are irreplaceable, that their choices don't carry consequences, that walking away is proof of strength rather than avoidance. Ego says, "I'll be fine," long before reality has a chance to respond. It thrives on immediate gratification and short-term wins. In that moment, leaving feels powerful. It feels like control. It feels like freedom. But ego has one weakness. It only survives in the present. It cannot negotiate with time, and it cannot escape it. Time doesn't argue. It doesn't chase. It doesn't explain. It simply waits. While ego is busy celebrating independence, time is quietly rearranging the truth. The excitement fades. The newness wears thin. Applause disappears. And when distractions no longer fill the silence, time steps in and starts asking questions ego avoided. Questions like, why doesn't this feel the same? Why do I feel empty even though I got what I wanted? Why does nothing replace what I lost? Time exposes what ego hides. It strips away illusion layer by layer until only honesty remains. Ego depends on external validation to survive. It feeds on attention, options, and admiration. But time removes the audience. People move on. Circumstances change. Energy shifts. What once felt impressive becomes ordinary. What once felt powerful becomes irrelevant. And without constant reinforcement, ego weakens. That's when memories return, not the dramatic ones, but the meaningful ones. The consistency. The grounding presence, the person who didn't compete for attention because they were the foundation. Time forces comparison, and ego loses every time because it cannot compete with substance. Humiliation doesn't always come in dramatic moments. Sometimes it arrives quietly, late at night, in stillness. It shows up when someone realizes they are no longer admired the way they expected to be. When the world doesn't bend to their confidence, when life keeps moving without asking permission, that's when ego cracks. And in that crack, truth enters. The truth that walking away wasn't strength, it was avoidance. The truth that confidence without character collapses. The truth that what they dismissed as ordinary was actually rare. Time humbles everyone eventually, not out of cruelty, but out of balance. It corrects arrogance and rewards depth. It teaches that ego may win moments, but humility wins life. And when time finishes its work, what remains is not pride, but understanding. An understanding that some doors closed not because they were meant to, but because ego was too loud to hear wisdom knocking. Regret doesn't arrive the way people expect it to. It doesn't burst through the door shouting accusations or demanding attention. It enters softly, almost politely, when the noise of life settles down. It shows up in pauses, in moments of reflection, in the spaces between distractions. Regret waits until there is nothing left to avoid it with, no excitement, no chaos, no justification, just silence and memory. That's when its voice becomes impossible to ignore, not because it is loud, but because it is honest. At first, regret disguises itself as nostalgia. It feels like harmless remembering, a passing thought about what once was. But nostalgia deepens when it isn't satisfied. It lingers. It revisits details that once felt insignificant. The tone of your voice, the way you showed up without being asked, the patience you extended when none was deserved. Regret doesn't focus on grand gestures. It focuses on the small consistencies that can't be recreated. The things that were never appreciated because they never demanded recognition. Those memories return unannounced, and they stay. Regret grows when comparison fails, when new experiences don't measure up, when people come and go without leaving an imprint. That's when the mind starts connecting dots it once ignored. It realizes that what was lost wasn't just a person, but a version of life that felt grounded, supported, real. Regret sharpens in the realization that the loss was avoidable, that it wasn't fate or timing or circumstance, but choice. And choices, once made, don't dissolve simply because understanding arrives later. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from knowing you were the reason something ended. Not because of cruelty, but because of neglect, ego, or blindness. That pain doesn't demand forgiveness. It demands accountability. Regret forces people to sit with the consequences of who they were when it mattered most. And the hardest part is realizing that apologies don't rewind time and awareness doesn't guarantee access. Regret matures when someone understands that growth doesn't always earn a second chance. Regret teaches without mercy, but also without malice. It doesn't seek to destroy, it seeks to reveal. It shows what mattered when it was too easy to dismiss. It clarifies value when it's no longer available. And it settles in not as a punishment, but as a reminder of what happens when appreciation arrives after absence, when understanding comes after loss, and when silence finally says everything that words never did. Loss has a way of breaking illusions that comfort never touches. As long as everything feels available, growth feels optional. People postpone self-reflection when life still gives them access, forgiveness, and second chances. But loss removes safety nets. It creates a gap between who someone believed they were and who they actually are when something meaningful disappears. That gap is uncomfortable. It exposes weakness, avoidance, and immaturity. And in that discomfort, growth either begins or denial deepens. There is no middle ground. Before loss, growth feels theoretical. People talk about becoming better, stronger, wiser, but rarely feel urgency. Loss creates urgency. It forces questions that were easy to ignore. Why did I take that for granted? Why did I think it would always be there? Why didn't I show up when it mattered? These questions don't come from inspiration. They come from pain, and pain has a way of demanding honesty. Growth that follows loss is rarely graceful. It is slow, humbling, and often filled with regret. But it is real because it is rooted in consequence. Loss strips away distractions and excuses. When something valuable is gone, there's nothing left to blame but self. That's when people confront patterns they once defended, the habits they justified, the emotional shortcuts they took, the moments they chose comfort over responsibility. Loss doesn't allow for selective memory. It replays moments with clarity, not to torture, but to teach. And in that replay, awareness forms. Awareness is the first true step toward growth. And it almost always arrives after something has been lost, not before. Growth after loss changes priorities. What once seemed important loses its shine. Validation feels hollow. Options feel meaningless. The focus shifts from chasing more to understanding what mattered. People begin to recognize depth over excitement, consistency over intensity, presence over promises. This shift doesn't happen because someone told them. It happens because loss made everything else feel empty. Growth reorders values, not through motivation, but through realization. Not all growth repairs what was broken. Sometimes it prepares someone for a future they can no longer share with the person who taught them the lesson. Growth doesn't guarantee reunion or redemption. It guarantees awareness, and awareness, once gained, cannot be undone. Loss becomes the teacher that comfort never could be, the one that arrives uninvited, stays longer than expected, and leaves behind a version of someone who finally understands what they once failed to protect. When someone comes back, it's rarely because the past suddenly became clearer out of kindness. It's because life confronted them in ways comfort never did. The return is born from internal collapse, not external success. It happens after ego has been exhausted, after options stop satisfying, after distractions lose their power. By the time they reach back, they are no longer searching for love. They are searching for relief. Relief from regret, from loneliness, from the weight of understanding what they lost. And that motivation matters because it explains why their return has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their awakening. People often confuse a return with recognition, but recognition would have shown up earlier, when effort was required, when humility was necessary, when staying mattered more than leaving. A return happens when someone finally feels the absence they created, when they realized the world did not reward their confidence the way they expected it to, when they discover what they dismissed was not easily replaced. Their return is an attempt to reconcile with themselves as much as it is with you. It's not a declaration of love. It's a confrontation with loss. A return does not erase the past. It does not undo the nights you had to grow alone, the moments you had to rebuild yourself, worth without explanation or closure. While they were learning through absence, you were learning through endurance. That difference is critical because the strength you developed did not come from regret. It came from resilience, and resilience changes perspective. You no longer view their presence as validation because you learned to validate yourself when they were gone. Understanding that their return is about them frees you from responsibility. You are not required to reopen wounds to confirm their growth. You are not obligated to reward realization that arrived late. Their regret is part of their journey, not your burden to carry. Compassion does not require self-betrayal. You can acknowledge their pain without sacrificing your progress. Growth taught you boundaries, and boundaries exist to protect what healing built. Sometimes people return hoping to step back into a version of you that no longer exists. They expect familiarity, comfort, access. But growth changes the landscape. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer proving. You are no longer available in the same way. And that shift is not punishment. It is evolution. Their return may be sincere, but sincerity does not override timing. And timing, once missed, cannot always be recovered. People often rewrite the past to protect themselves. It's easier to label someone as a mistake than to admit they were a lesson learned too late. Calling you a mistake would mean nothing meaningful was lost. But the truth is, mistakes don't leave permanent marks. Lessons do. Lessons change behavior, thinking, and identity. If your absence reshaped how someone sees love, commitment, or loyalty, then you were never a misstep. You were a turning point. And turning points are never accidental. Being the lesson means you represented something unfamiliar to them at the time. You showed consistency in a world that rewards inconsistency. You showed patience in a culture addicted to instant gratification. You offered depth where they were still living on the surface. That kind of presence challenges people who aren't ready. Instead of rising to it, they retreat from it, not because it was wrong, but because it required growth they hadn't yet earned. Walking away was easier than becoming better. Lessons are often misunderstood in the moment they appear. They don't announce their importance. They feel ordinary while they're happening. But once they're gone, their weight becomes undeniable. If someone looks back and realizes they measure everyone else against you, that is not coincidence. That is imprint. That is impact. Lessons don't fade, they follow people forward. They show up in future choices, in regrets, in comparisons, in the standards they finally learn to hold themselves to. Being the lesson also means you were not meant to stay indefinitely. Some connections exist to awaken, not to last. Not because they lack value, but because their purpose is transformational rather than permanent. You were part of someone's becoming, even if they were not part of your future. That does not diminish what you shared, it defines it. Not every meaningful role is lifelong. Some are pivotal. You don't need validation from someone realizing your value after losing access to you. The fact that your absence taught them something they couldn't learn while you were present is confirmation enough. You were not too much. You were not misplaced. You were not wrong. You were the experience that changed the trajectory of someone's understanding. And lessons like that are never forgotten. And here's the truth that brings it all together. When someone shows up again, changed, humbled, and full of realization, it doesn't mean you were meant to go backward. It means you were strong enough to move forward without them. Their return is proof of your impact, not an invitation to repeat history. Some people come back to acknowledge what they lost, not to reclaim it. You don't owe anyone access to the version of you that survived their absence. You don't owe explanations, closure, or comfort. What you owe is loyalty to the growth that carried you through the silence. The strength you built didn't come from being chosen. It came from choosing yourself when no one else did. Let them arrive with understanding if they must. Let them carry their regret if they need to. But remember this, the door they knock on now is not the same door they walked away from. You are no longer standing where they left you. You are standing where you earned your peace.